Log into Admin UI and select the drug program and dataset that you would like to add Tumour Response data to. On the Clinical Study Setup menu, go to Create Mappings. The Tumour Response view can be quite complex to map, and the types of information required to build the waterfall plot and the target lesion diameter over time plots are the RECIST Target Lesion Assessments, RECIST 1, and RECIST Assessment Summarised, RECIST 2. In addition to this, if information on non-target lesion assessments is required, this must also be mapped as RECIST 1, and the information for the target and non-target lesions can either be loaded as one file or two. In the example that I'm going to show you now, we will map both target and non-target lesions. So to start with, I've already mapped these, so what you would normally do is you would click Add. From your data option, select RECIST target lesions, and as shown in previous modules, you would enter the file name, location here, and uncheck the predict mappings. As mine's already mapped, I'll just cancel that. So for the RECIST target lesions, if I click on that, we can see that it brings up the RECIST table, RECIST target lesions table. Here we need to, as with other data mappings, we need to map the source data column to the data field. So for study identifier here, we have study part identifier is part, subject identifier is subject, target lesion date of scan clinical examination. This is a date that will be used to determine baseline and post-baseline assessments. And remember to use the aggregation function for data assembler. The next one is site of target lesion. Then it's target lesion number. Now, target lesion number is the unique lesion identifier within a subject's target lesions data, and this is used to look for missing target lesions. Only entries where lesion numbers are 1 to 5 or T1 to T5 will be picked up by the system. So you need to ensure that the data here is a number that's either 1 to 5 or T1 to T5. The next one is if there's any target lesions present, yes or no. And then we have longest diameter of target lesion. This is actually used in the calculation of the bar's height. We then have visit date, which is, again, you must remember to use the aggregation function to represent the data assembler for how this data is presented in your source data. Visit number, which is a number, and then I've also mapped here investigator's opinion of response, and this is text data. So again, the mappings are very similar to how we've mapped before, just to ensure that the source data columns that you are aligning to a data field do actually contain the data that you're expected to load against the data field. Confirm the mappings are correct and then save. We will now move on to, in this example, we're going to map the non-RECIST target lesions as well. And this is also RECIST 1. So again, in your you would select add from the data type. This time you would again select RECIST 1, but this time you would be selecting RECIST non-target lesion assessments. When you click on that, that will present the option up there for you. Again, you need to enter the data source location and then click OK to present the specific mapping table beneath. So if we go to RECIST non-target lesion assessments here that has been mapped, you can see that here my source data file is the same as the RECIST target lesion assessment file, and that's because my data is combined in the one file. You can have it, if in your system it is separate, you can have it separate and have the appropriate naming here. So again, for this one, we have a number of data fields that need to be mapped to the source data columns. And I'm mapping all the data fields that I have, the true and the mandatory and the non-mandatory ones that are present in my data. So again, we have study part identifier, subject identifier. We then have target lesion date of scan, site of non-target lesion, so the actual site where the lesion was present. If there are any non-target lesions present, yes, that's a yes/no field. We have visit date and we have visit number, which should be a number. And again, for visit date and the scan date, you must remember to use the appropriate aggregation functions to represent how the date is presented in the source data file. Again, you would confirm your mappings and click Save. And finally then, for the RECIST, we also need to map RECIST Assessment Summarise, which is RECIST 2. So if you click Add, your data type this time will be RECIST Assessment Summarise, RECIST 2. So if I click on that, it presents the table below. You can see that this time a different file has been mapped to the RECIST 1. The data is contained in a separate file. And here we have your study identifier, study part identifier. We also have subject identifier, visit date, visit number. Again, for the visit date, remember to use the aggregation function for the date assembler. Visit number should be a number. Whether or not there was any new lesions present, this is a yes/no functionality. What the new lesion site was. And again, we've got new lesion scan date. So again, remember the aggregation function and the data assembler. RECIST response, this is actually used to determine the colouring of the bars in the waterfall plot. We have whether or not the investigator agrees with the RECIST response, the investigator's opinion of the patient status, and finally here, reason RECIST and investigator assessments differ if they do, if that's something that's in your source data. And finally here we have assessment frequency. This is usually entered as a default value, so our assessment frequency is every 4 weeks, and it's used to determine the assessment weeks on the actual plot. So again, we can confirm that these mappings are correct and save the mappings. Once you're happy that your mappings have saved successfully, we can move over to the review data setup. We can check that the radio button for confirming the data is checked and click Finish. We are here now presented with whether or not we want to load our data into the system. Click Yes. We're now brought back to the Admin UI homepage, and from here we can view the data load report to check our data load status. So if I refresh, we can see that the load data that we've just mapped and loaded has completed successfully with no errors. There's no exception report. There's no source data. The source data table report shows that the mappings are correct. We then have source data field report. Again, this is showing that your mappings are correct, and there's nothing in the source data value report as expected because everything has loaded successfully. Our file count has now gone up to 8 because we have just loaded 3 new files. So that's now at the point where you can start doing some checks in VA Hub to see whether or not the visualization is being presented as expected.